Good evening, folks. Thank you very much for joining us tonight at 8 o'clock on what for many is your first day back. So congratulations for, most of you first day back, some of you second. So congratulations, back for term 2. Hope you had a wonderful holiday. And thank you for the commitment you've shown to join us here at 8 o'clock. To learn about energy systems and particularly energy systems interplay. My name's Paul Stockdale from ABCPE. Joining us tonight also is Mike Woolhouse. G'day, Wooly. And we've got a special guest, Monique Sharp from Melbourne Girls Grammar, who's also our Assistant Chief Assessor and will help us tremendously with the energy systems and the energy systems interplay and how VCAR are best marking those. So welcome, Monique, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Folks, once again, we're going to have an interactive session where we will ask you to be active learners, not just sit there and absorb information. That's one way to learn, no doubt. But we find the best results come when we are active. That is, we try and retrieve information from our brain and put it into practice questions. So there'll be a number of practice questions where we'll ask you to commit your answers to Q&A. That will take some time because we're dealing with some higher order questions tonight in those interplay questions. Nonetheless, we've got two of the very best assessors on board to give you feedback. So that feedback will be absolute gold, I hope, for you, but it will be a process and there will be times where there'll be moments of silence. That's okay. You'll get the most out of it by interacting with it. Now, Willie's just said I need to make him a co-host, so I'm just going to do that before we start.
And as you do that, guys, just know that if you can get some feedback on your answers, you're definitely going to improve. Don't worry what's happened to date in terms of SAC scores, all that sort of stuff. Just it's all about improving and doing your best. The fact that you're here tonight means that you're ready to do your best and get better. That's what we're trying to do. We were just having a chat before, and the reason we've asked Mon tonight is because Stockers and I want to get better. She's a guru at this stuff. She knows that she's studied a lot of this at university. So we had a 5-minute conversation before, and I've learned something off her tonight as well. So if you take that attitude in, we're going to be all good. Now, in terms of recording, we're recording it. We won't send it out to everyone, but if you would request it, then just shoot us an email at admin@abcpe.com. I'll put the email into the chat and we'll send that out sort of individually.
All right, now in terms of chat, that's going to be your way to communicate with me tonight. But when we are doing a formal question, and there will be some VCAR questions as well as some likely SAC questions in tonight's presentation, when we're doing those, I would ask that you put it into Q&A. It's much easier for Monique and Mike to answer those questions in Q&A than it is on chat. But if I ask a question on screen, by all means, throw it into chat. And perhaps we'll get that ball rolling. And if you could put into chat, please, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being, you know what, I know everything there is to know about energy systems. I should be able to smash tonight. To 1, I've got no clue, Paul, never even heard of energy systems. Throw that into chat, please. It just gives an idea of where you sit on that continuum. Got a couple of 10s, which will be brilliant. So we can use those for exemplars, I would suggest, a little later on.
Got a 15, mate.
Hey, we got an 11 from Luca, and that's one. I think it was Luca anyway. That's wonderful to see.
That's confidence.
OB's got the 20. Now, it's probably a good opportunity for me to say, too, that this is a public forum, and so people need to be safe to learn here, which means let's keep our chat above board, please. I don't want any innuendo. I certainly don't want any silly comments in there because, quite frankly, people don't have to be here. They're giving up their time. They want to learn, and it's not okay to distract that process. So I don't know whether there was a common, an average number there, Willie. I'm thinking between 6 and 7s where people are at. Yeah. I might ask for one more piece of information from everybody, and that is, when is your energy system SAC? Is that this week? Is it in a few weeks? Let us know so that we've got a bit of an idea. There's someone in two days, but most of us are a couple of weeks away. So All right, we're coming with different levels of knowledge. All right, well, let's get the show on the road. You'll see the VCAR dot points here. We're going to hit characteristics of the three energy systems tonight. We are going to talk about rate and yield of each of those energy systems. We might touch on passive and active recoveries, but we're certainly not going to be touching fatigue and limiting factors this evening. As I said, we will hit interplay, and I'll leave as much time as I possibly can for that, because if there's one thing I know with 100% certainty, and I certainly don't know what's on the end of year exam, I'd love to, but I don't. But one thing I do know with 100% certainty is that there will be an energy systems interplay question. And sometimes there's two, and there's been years where there's three. So we need to prepare for it. And I will also say that the state notoriously does fairly poorly with those interplay questions. And I've sort of made it a bit of a crusade of ABCPE to improve the state standard on interplay questions. Okay.
You made Monaco host, not me, mate. So if you just change that, then we're good to go.
Okay, we are done. And so what that means is when you do put into chat, by all means, put it into me and I will see it. If you want a particular question answered by Wooly or Mon, put it into those two. The formal questions, please put into Q&A. So this is part of our aiming for the next level tutorial series. We're running these sessions on Wednesday night all throughout the term. We'll go a lot slower in those, and there'll be a lot more opportunity for interaction. So if throughout tonight, there's something that you don't quite understand, we do have the opportunity to re-engage with us and seek clarification over the next number of Wednesdays this term, where we will hit fatigue and recovery, and we will hit acute responses as well, which is part of this unit. Okay, so what are energy systems? Well, they're all to do with this chemical compound called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. ATP is the chemical in the muscle that provides the energy for all muscular contractions. And we're pretty interested as exercise scientists in muscular contractions, because when we exercise, we obviously want to contract our muscles an awful lot. So when we exercise, we need a lot of adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. It's the only chemical that will contract a muscle. Nothing else will. But I always say that whoever made us, whatever you believe in, God, got it wrong, because only gave us a very small amount of ATP. And you can see they're around 90 grams. You'll never need to know that, but I'll often say it's enough for 1 or 2 maximal contractions. Some of the texts will say 1 to 2 seconds. It doesn't really matter how much, as long as you know that it's very, very limited. And yet you and I know that there's some people out there that exercise well past 1 to 2 seconds. Some people run marathons, and yet they've only got enough ATP stored for a very small amount of time. What that means is that we must have some way of resynthesizing or producing ATP in the body. So how does this ATP work? Well, we have adenosine triphosphate that is comprised of an adenosine molecule and 3 phosphate molecules, and there they are right there. And when we break off a phosphate, when that breaks off, it gives us energy. So the breaking down of ATP, right, the phosphate breaking off and becoming what we call an inorganic phosphate, that's why that I is there, that gives us energy. And that energy is used for all muscular contractions. If you want to put it into a chemical formula, there it is. ATP gets broken down to what we call ADP, PI, or an inorganic phosphate, and gives us energy. Now, I wonder if you good people know what ADP stands for. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. What does ADP stand for? Put it into chat. And Greta, straight away, adenosine diphosphate. Plenty of you putting that in. Brilliant. Di meaning 2. So there's our adenosine, our 2 phosphates, and an inorganic or free floating phosphate. But we only have enough of this ATP for 1 to 2 seconds worth of activity. So we have to then rebuild, replenish, produce, resynthesize ATP. And the way we do that is we require energy. So in order to make ADP and PI, bring them back together, put the P back on the ADP, we require energy to build the ATP. And that energy is going to come from our energy systems. And there are 3 of them. And there they are down below. So ATP contracts a muscle, energy systems do not. Energy systems produce ATP so that it can break down and contract a muscle. Now we've got 3 energy systems, and it's important for you to know throughout tonight that all 3 are working all of the time. But often there is one that we're using mainly. It's providing the most ATP to any activity, I suppose, and intensity and the duration of the activity is what determines which one at any given time is the main one that's providing ATP. Now, you'll note that I'm being very, very careful with my wording. Over the years, we've used words such as dominant, predominant, and I'm being very careful not to use it. I'll probably make a mistake tonight and use it. But the reason I'm being very careful is that we have absolute surety that VCAR would like us to steer away from those 2 words, just because they're confusing and often used incorrectly. And so it's been a bit of an edict over the last couple of years to steer away from predominant and dominant.
And Paul, I think it's worthwhile just mentioning on that when you look over the VCAR responses over the last few years, you will find those words up until probably about 2020. The words dominant and predominant are used quite heavily. But as Paul said, there has been some challenges in when to use each of those words. So VCAR have come up with some other ways and some other terms. And as teachers, we all slip back into dominant sometimes because that's the way that we've taught it for a long time. But there's certainly other ways that we can describe that that will be really effective in your interplay questions.
And we'll see if I can hit a few of those ways tonight but if I do make a mistake, I'd love somebody out there to pick me up on it and let me know. That would be great, because you've got to remember that this is 20 odd years of a habit here. Okay, so intensity of duration is going to determine which one is used the most. Now we've got 3 energy systems. 2 of them are anaerobic. Put into the chat, please, what does anaerobic mean? 2 of them are anaerobic. 1 of them is aerobic. What's anaerobic? Here it comes. Look at this. We're right onto it. It means that they work without oxygen. Absolutely. And obviously the one aerobic energy system requires oxygen in order to work. Now, because they don't require oxygen, our anaerobic systems can be used when we need our ATP quickly. Right. Now, we can't get much ATP from these systems, but we can certainly get the ATP quickly. So someone like Usain Bolt, who obviously has a very short race, but a very high intensity race, in fact, a maximal intensity race, he's going to rely on the anaerobic systems and particularly going to rely mainly on the ATP-CP system. Someone like Kathy Freeman, who again, short duration race, but beyond the capacity of the ATP-PC system, and we'll talk about that shortly. So a slightly longer duration, but still high intensity. She's going to mostly rely on the anaerobic glycolysis system. And then you've got the great Cadel Evans, who races the Tour de France, is on the bike pretty much all day, can't go as fast, certainly can't get there his ATP as quickly as Usain Bolt, but can get a truckload more ATP from that aerobic system. So these are the intensities and durations where these energy systems are usually the most relied on or the greatest contributors. So we're now going to go through the characteristics of each system, and these may point you into the direction as to why these systems work under different conditions. Each of the three systems has strengths and limitations. Now, the absolute strength of the ATP-CP system is that we can use it for maximal intensity activity. That is, we can get our ATP very quickly. And the reason, if you can shift your eyes to the right of screen, the reason that we can get our ATP quickly is that we have a very simple chemical breakdown. The chemical pathway to liberate energy and produce ATP is simple. We have a creatine molecule and a phosphate molecule, and they split apart and give energy. That energy is used to put a P back onto an ADP and produce ATP. Now, as quickly as we break down ATP, we can resynthesize it with CP. It's almost a one-for-one process. So it's very quick. But the limitation is that we only have limited fuel. PC, we don't have much of. Around about 10 seconds of maximum intensity activity. Obviously, if it's not maximum intensity, we'll have longer, right? But around about 10 seconds. Even the great Usain Bolt, who's trained his entire life to try and improve this energy system, probably hasn't got much more than 12, 15 seconds. We'll never know exactly. Okay, so let's go through the characteristics here. This system is anaerobic, doesn't require oxygen. That's one of the reasons why it's fast. It relies on a fuel called creatine phosphate or phosphocreatine. You'll see this system written as ATP-CP or ATP-PC, or you might see it as the phosphagen system. VCAR language is ATP-CP. So let's try and use that. As I said, it's for maximal intensity activity. Now, I've got here 95% plus heart rate max, but you know what? That's just a guide, because the reality is when you use this system, you can't actually get to that heart rate, but it's a guide. It's, in other words, saying on a scale of 1 to 10, you need to be working about 9.5 plus very, very quickly. Very short duration. The rate is very fast, but the yield is very low. What does that mean? What does rate mean? It means how quickly we get our ATP. And this one, PC system, gives it to us the fastest. What does yield mean? If rate means how fast we get our ATP, what does yield mean? Here it comes. It's how much ATP we get. Absolutely. Well done, everybody. And we don't get much at all. So this is a very low yield, but very fast rate. And as I said, all these systems have strengths and limitations. So some of the examples where this system is the most relied on or the greatest contributor: a full forward lead over 20 meters, discus, shot put, high jump, long jump. These maximal intensity, very short duration activities. Down below it says there's a finite capacity. That is, we can run out of it. Pretty much. We don't run out of 100% of it, but we run out of it to the point where we can't use the system until it's replenished. And the best way to replenish it, folks, is by doing what we call a passive recovery. That is, we sit, we stand, we lie. So if you were the coach of this person here, the shot putter, and she has 3 attempts, she's utilizing the ATP-PC system, what would you say to her is the best thing to do in between each of the throws? And I've got lots and lots of people saying rest, sit, lie, or stand. Absolutely. You will not see a shot putter, a discus thrower, a high jumper, a long jumper running a lap of the oval in between each jump. It doesn't make sense. It's not a passive recovery. It's an active recovery, and a passive recovery is going to replenish that PC ultra quick. Okay, well done. Let's move on. Quick question. Well, if you've got a poll there, I think you have. Let's see how well everyone's listened.
Just while they're doing this, mate, the question that's coming through a fair bit is numbers. Do we need numbers? No. There was Chris Clark, who's now the head of VCAR, sent out an email not long ago that said, The numbers specifically aren't super important. What is important is that we can identify really strongly these words of rate and yield. So the ATP-PC system having hopefully I won't give away the answer, but the numbers is not important, but the, I guess, ranking them is what's important.
Yep. Okay, well, let's end that because they well and truly know this by the looks of it. I'll share the results there. Answer is C. According to me, I've got 94% have put C. So it's not a slow rate with a high yield. That would be the aerobic system. A slow rate with a low yield, there's not really an energy system that that's like that. A fast rate with a high yield, we wish. Everyone wishes we had an energy system like that. In fact, if we could use the ATP-PC system, if we had, let's say, a much bigger yield, we could use it for an hour. We could run a marathon in an hour, but we can't. So C is our answer. Not sure whether they're sharing, but there they are. Okay, let's go on to the next system, the anaerobic glycolysis system. And again, avert your eyes to the right of the screen, and we'll go to this chemical pathway because it should explain to you why this system doesn't have as fast a rate. Because look at the pathway. It's a more complex pathway. And because it's a more complex pathway, or in other words, there's more breakdown to get our energy, it takes longer. Now, it's still a fast system, but it's not as fast as the ATP-PC system or the ATP-CP, and I need to retrain into making sure I use that language as well. We change fuels here. So phosphocreatine or creatine phosphate's not the fuel. We've got glycogen, which is a stored carbohydrate in the muscle. We break that down to glucose, and then that gets broken down into pyruvic acid. And in this case, pyruvic acid doesn't find oxygen. There's no oxygen available. And there'll be a couple of reasons why oxygen's not available. I'll give you one. One is we're probably or possibly exercising too quickly. Can anyone think of another circumstance as to why there wouldn't be enough oxygen for that pyruvic acid to find it? Tough question, but there's some very clever kids here. Okay, and straight away, people have gone oxygen deficit. All right, it could be that the person's at the beginning of exercise and oxygen supply hasn't met demand yet. That would be another reason why that pyruvate can't find oxygen. Now, we break glycogen down to glucose, down to pyruvic acid. There's no oxygen available, and so that pyruvic acid will turn into lactic acid. The lactic acid will then turn into lactate and hydrogen ions. They will dissociate. And that process will give us a certain number of ATP. It will give us more ATP than the ATP-PC system. Okay, so we can produce ATP quickly. We can produce more ATP using this system. Let's go to the left-hand side now. So this is an anaerobic system. It doesn't require oxygen, or oxygen's not available. It will only use glycogen as a fuel. It can't use any other fuel. It's for high intensity. It's still a relatively quick process. All right? Glycogen to glucose to pyruvic acid, it happens fairly quickly. This is not a complete breakdown of glycogen. Glycogen can be broken down with far more steps, but this is enough to get some ATP. Now, again, I've given you a heart rate max, 85 to 95%. We can go a little longer with this one. The limiting factor for this, and I said every energy system's got strengths and limitations. The limiting factor is not the fuel. We do not run out of fuel with this system because we've got enough fuel for 90 to 120 minutes of exercise. The limiting factor is this part down here, our hydrogen ions. These hydrogen ions, I've got it in red there. It begins with H. The body hates them. The muscles hate them. They will inhibit muscular contractions. Lactate's no problem. Lactate starts with L. Body quite likes lactate. It can turn it into a fuel. But hydrogen ions, the muscles can't operate. with large quantities of hydrogen ions. So in terms of rate and yield, we've got a fast rate, a fairly low yield, but it's obviously higher than the ATP-PC system. There's some examples of sports where this is the most relied on energy system. And of course, our limiting factor, without doubt, is this byproduct, this toxic byproduct, which stops the muscles from contracting, hydrogen ions. Now, it's enough for us to say they inhibit muscular contractions, the hydrogen ions. So anyone who's ever run a 400 probably will know the feeling towards the end of that race where their legs just feel like jelly and you don't feel like you can finish. It feels like they're not going to move, even though you're willing them to move. That's hydrogen ions, and they're causing the muscles to be acidic. And as a result of that, we can't break down glycogen, and so we can't use this system. Now, the best way to remove hydrogen ions once the event is finished is to do what we call an active recovery. So with the ATP-CP system, it was a passive recovery is best because it will replenish PC faster. If we're in a race or an event that's required the anaerobic glycolysis system to a large extent, the best thing to do is an active recovery, or what we would call a cool down. Let's see how well we listened in that one. Give this one a go, guys. Okay, so results are a little bit more mixed with this one.
This is tougher.
Mm.
Now, there's someone in here that is guaranteeing no wrong answers tonight as well, mate. So I hope this person has not got this one wrong. But we're about 50-50.
Right. Someone that you know.
No, but he's confident. I assume it's a he, and they're confident. Put it that way. But I like confidence. That's good.
Okay, so let's end the poll there.
Yep.
We'll share the results. Okay, there they are. So we've got 53% saying A and 43% saying B. You'd have to be fairly sure that it's between those two. So a complete breakdown of glycogen in the anaerobic glycolysis system, or an incomplete breakdown of glycogen in the anaerobic glycolysis system. So it's either a complete or an incomplete breakdown. And folks, I can tell you with some certainty, and it will become very apparent in the next slide, that it's an incomplete breakdown of glycogen.
You've almost got a perfect definition there of anaerobic glycolysis. Just need to add in without oxygen.
Thank you very much. So I don't know whether it's one of my questions or not. Oh, it is one of my questions. There you go. So guys, we can liberate more ATP from glycogen, but not through the anaerobic glycolysis system. We would need to be using the aerobic system to get more ATP from glycogen. And we're going to go on to that very shortly. Now, I did see a question in here, someone asking about glycogen, glucose, and carbohydrates. Did you guys want to address that question at all? Or has it been addressed?
Yeah, sure. I can address it for everyone though. So the question was about the difference in terms of food and chemical fuel, which has been a question on multi-choice a couple of times. So it's just about, and VCAR do specifically talk about food and chemical fuel. Food is what you're eating. So a food fuel might be fat, it might be carbohydrate, which are the main food fuels that we talk about when we're talking about this metabolic production of ATP. What's the other one that we could potentially lean on if we are fully glycogen depleted and we're suffering from triglyceride depletion, which is going to take a really long time? Absolutely, protein is our other macronutrient as well. So they are our food fuels. The chemical fuels is what it looks like in the body. So it might be glycogen, which is the carbohydrate that's stored in our muscle. It might be triglyceride, which is the way that fat is stored in our muscle, or it might be, great, people are ahead there of the game, amino acid, which is the way protein is stored. So food fuel is what you are eating, and the chemical fuel is how you are finding it in the body.
Thank you very much for that one. Okay, let's move on. doing very well. So our aerobic system. So this is the one where we need, this is the one that requires oxygen, okay? And that is a limiting factor in itself because oxygen's going to take time to get to the muscles. Because you think about oxygen, it's outside the body. So we have to bring it into the body by breathing. It's got to go into the lungs. It then has to enter the bloodstream, go back to the heart. Then the heart has to pump it to the muscles. It takes time. Okay, so that means we're not going to be able to get our ATP as quickly because we've got to wait for oxygen. Now, this one's a ripper because we aren't going to run out of fuels for this one because we can use 3 fuels. They're all food fuels. Okay, so we eat and we can store those fuels in the body. Our body prefers to use carbohydrates during exercise conditions. It will use fats, generally speaking, at rest or very low intensity exercise. Very, very rare for it to use protein. We can use it. We can use it for energy, but it would be in very severe circumstances. I've got POW there. I mean, some of those pictures that you sometimes see of the prisoners of war in the Second World War, where they're emaciated, they're probably using protein just to stay alive. And when we run out of that, then that's the end of our lives. So let's have a look at the chemical pathway. And so this will put the last question into perspective for you. The chemical pathway, and we only need to really know the pathway for glycogen. And we do need to know that the body will utilize fats under rest conditions, but we don't need to know the pathway for that. It's a very complicated and long chemical pathway. This one's still a pretty long chemical pathway, and we don't need to know all of it, but I'll take you through it because I think it'll help you understand. So we use the same fuel as the anaerobic glycolysis system, although we know we can use 2 others. Glucose to pyruvic acid. So this is the same process as the anaerobic glycolysis system. The difference is here. We now have oxygen available. So we've obviously been exercising for long enough that the body's been able to respond and send oxygen to the muscle. We're obviously exercising at a low enough intensity because this system takes time to get its ATP. So once oxygen is found, that's a key to get into little organelles in the muscle called mitochondria. And I'm sure most people have heard about mitochondria. If you're anything like my kids, what would be the definition of mitochondria? Everyone says this. What are they? What are the mitochondria? It'll take no time at all for the powerhouse of the cell to come out. That's right. Absolutely. The powerhouse of the cell. Okay, that's the site of all aerobic ATP production. So once pyruvic acid finds oxygen, it can enter the mitochondria. It goes through 2 further cycles. We don't need to know anything about these cycles except for the fact that we go through them. That's beyond our study design. As a result of going through these cycles, we produce carbon dioxide, heat, and water. So this is aerobic respiration. They're our byproducts and a truckload of ATP. Now, you don't need to know the number of ATP. And in fact, there's new research out to say that number is not possibly correct. But we just need to know that this system will completely break down glycogen. It will liberate all the energy from it, produce a huge number of ATP. But the limitation, folks, is it just takes time. So as a result of it taking time, we can only use it when we're exercising at low intensities. But the absolute strength is that we can use it for a long, long period of time. Its rate is slow, but its yield is very, very high. And so your long distance endurance type events, marathon, Tour de France, cross-country skiers are your absolute no-brainers for this energy system. Definitely most relied. In fact, really any event that goes beyond around 90 seconds to 2 minutes or so is going to be mainly the aerobic system contributing. Let's see how well you remembered that. And I would expect this might be one, Wooly, that we get 100% on. Let's see. No pressure, folks. Well, overwhelming, not quite 100%. Who's calling me Paulie? OB, you're just about to get kicked out of here, mate. I'll see if I can come up with one a little bit more difficult to challenge you, OB. Okay, so let's end that poll. You can see that most of you have gone with A, and that's good because that's the correct answer. Lactate and hydrogen ions we won't get from this system because the pyruvate finds oxygen. If the pyruvic acid doesn't find oxygen, that's when we're going to get the lactate and the hydrogen ions. One more. This is a more difficult one, OB, but I'll be interested to see how you go. Yeah, okay. It looks like that one's a pretty easy one too. Or either that, or we've just got the cleverest people in town. So the rate, Wesley's just come up and said, what's the rate of the aerobic energy system? The rate is slow. Cleverest people in town, that's good. Okay, let's end that poll. Let's get an answer. Of course, the answer is pyruvic acid. You know it, and I know it. So we get pyruvic acid is a breakdown from glucose through both the aerobic glycolysis system and the anaerobic glycolysis system. If I'm not mistaken, we should be pretty much up to interplay now, which is exciting times for us. Now, on the page is a summary. Now, if you learn nothing from tonight and you just take a photo of that summary, that's going to get you through quite a lot of lower order questions for your SAC and even in the exam. Okay, lower order. It's not going to get you the big marks for the higher order questions, which is what we're going to go on to now. Now, I saw someone use a term in chat called aerobic lipolysis. So aerobic lipolysis is the breakdown of lipids or fats to produce energy through the aerobic system. It's only the aerobic system that can break down fats, and it is rightly called the aerobic lipolysis system. We need to have very limited knowledge of the aerobic lipolysis system. We simply need to know that we can break down fats and that fats will give us a huge amount of ATP, more than the breakdown of glycogen. But the limiting factor with fats is it takes far longer to get our ATP. That is, it's a more complex breakdown. It would go over about 5 slides, the chemical pathway. It requires more oxygen to break down, and therefore it produces the ATP much, much slower. And when we're exercising, we actually need our ATP quickly. So using fats is not necessarily a good thing when we're exercising because we just can't get the ATP fast enough. So therefore we can't exercise fast enough. Anyone who's heard the term hitting the wall, a lot of marathoners will talk about hitting the wall. It often happens towards the end of a marathon. What they're saying is that they've run out of glycogen and they had to utilize a high percentage of fats to produce ATP. As soon as you do that, you know you're in trouble because you're not going to get your ATP quickly. All right, now we've gone through these characteristics and it's been very clunky. You've probably just learned them. So let's put this into a question. And I would suggest this is possibly a difficult question. Similarities and differences in the process of ATP production via the aerobic and anaerobic pathways. Now, Wooly and I put together this list. There is now a VCAR list out there. So for all teachers who are listening tonight, there is now a generic list of task words that VCAR put out for all subjects. In the absence of this, Wooly and I put this one out. Take a screenshot. It's pretty handy, but we'll need to update it now that VCAR have put one out. So if we go down to compare, and it says compare similarities and differences, that's what this question is asking us for. And our advice is when you see similarities and differences, link with both and whereas. So for your similarities, use the word both, and for your differences, use the word whereas. So let's go back to that question describe the similarities and differences in the process of ATP production via aerobic and anaerobic pathways. We've just looked at them. This is a 4-mark question. So if I count the marks, I know I need to include 4 pieces of information. So I can include 2 similarities and 2 differences, or I can include 1 similarity and 3 differences, or I can include 3 similarities and 1 difference in the process of ATP production via aerobic and anaerobic pathways. Hopefully I've given you enough to get 4 marks for this, but let's see how you go. Don't forget to use those linking words both and whereas for differences, both for similarities, whereas for differences. I need to be quiet so that you can do it. I'm going to give you 4 minutes. This is one that needs to go into Q&A, please, to help Mon and Mike give you good feedback. Good luck. Okay, so there's some starting to come through. Which is good timing because we are only 2 minutes in.
Just put a link into that task words that you're talking about, Stocky. It's probably more important for the teachers that are here than the kids, but it'll help with both for sure. OB's just asked, he has got something wrong tonight. Where do we put the answers? In the Q&A is much easier for us because we can tick them off as we go. Thanks, Oscar.
About 30 seconds to go, and it will be 4 minutes. And they're absolutely coming through thick and fast now. So I'll go through the answer and leave Mon and Mike to be giving you guys feedback. Because of the sheer numbers, it's probably going to be unlikely they'll get feedback to everybody, but they will do their absolute level best. All right, so that's time, and I will take you through how I would answer this. Someone's just said, does spelling words matter? No, as long as the assessors can understand what you're trying to say, spelling doesn't matter at all. So we're looking for a 4-mark question, describe the similarities and differences, and I would start with this, both. So this is obviously going to be a similarity. anaerobic and aerobic energy systems contribute to ATP resynthesis at the beginning of exercise. I don't think there's a mark for that because they've already told me that it's involved in the process of ATP production, but both will produce byproducts in the process. Now, you could list those byproducts if you wanted to, but as it turns out, it wasn't necessary. So byproducts, both the anaerobic and the aerobic pathways will produce them. I saw someone talking about pyruvic acid. I saw someone talking about carbon dioxide, water, heat versus lactate and hydrogen ions. That's all fine. I've gone with another both, that both the anaerobic glycolysis system and the anaerobic and the aerobic energy system break down glycogen. I saw that throughout as well. Here are my differences. However, the anaerobic pathways resynthesize ATP without oxygen, whereas the aerobic pathway requires oxygen. And then finally, the aerobic energy system has an infinite capacity or a high yield, whereas the anaerobic energy systems have a low yield. And I've seen that repeatedly throughout your answers. I could have gone with rate as well. So we've got high yield versus low yield. I've got oxygen, no oxygen for 2 marks. I've got byproducts, there's another mark for 3. And I've got both breakdown glycogen, there's another mark for 4. Now, this was a VCAR question in 2016. So those of you who think you've answered that and are getting 4 marks, just know that that puts you into 40 territory. Only 9% are getting 4 marks for that in 2016, and the top 9% in this subject and any subject gets 40. So if that's what you're in the game for, you want to be getting 4 for this. There's a list of all the responses, or most of the responses anyway, that they accepted. All right, how are they looking so far, Mike and Mon? How are the answers looking?
Just read a couple. I'll go just quickly. We need 4 points. So the main thing is that, so the similarities is probably easier because you can just say both for one sentence. But if you say a difference, you really need to give me a characteristic from both systems. So for example, you just can't say the aerobic system has a fast rate. It needs to be a comparison. And you need 4 points in your answers. So the first few I've read have given me 3 and 2. You can't get bonus marks. I need 4 bits of info.
The other thing as well, just going on from what Mike is saying, is that I'm reading a few of them that's saying the aerobic system is slower than the anaerobic, and that's absolutely correct. But that word rate is a key term for VCA, and they'll really be looking for those key terms, rate and yield, to be incorporated within the response. So you want to try and jam pack as many of those key terms in as possible. So if you're writing slower, make sure you put the word rate after it.
Yep. Great. Thanks for the feedback, guys. Now let's move on. Now this is something that the Mon and Mike don't need to see this. You can throw this into chat because they're going to be flat out for a little while giving feedback here. All right. So this is a shot putter. Which energy system is the greatest contributor in the shot put? Throw that into chat, please. Okay, ATP CP seems to be the one. Absolutely. Is the greatest contributor. We've got to be careful. If that question said which energy system is used for the shot put, what would you put? Which energy system is used? Yes, nice. All 3 energy systems are used. Love it. Well done. But the greatest contributor is certainly going to be the ATP PC system. High jump. We're looking for the greatest contributor. Absolutely. Well done, Jess O'Donnell. Saw you in here. Brilliant. Yes, Sarah, thank you. All correct. Which system is the greatest contributor? This is a tough question. So we've got some people starting with the ATP PC system, and now I'm starting to get some people questioning, going, well, hang on, what event is it? So there's not enough information, is there, to say what event this is. So if we just look at the dive, if it's just the dive, Noah, what would you put? ATP-PC system, absolutely. What if it was a 100-meter freestyle, folks? 100-meter freestyle. And some people are going anaerobic. Yeah, I need more information than anaerobic. I want the greatest contributor. I need an energy system. Anaerobic's not an energy system. Anaerobic glycolysis is, absolutely. Because you should be asking yourself, what's the duration of the 100-meter freestyle? I'd imagine, without being a swimmer, that they're doing it in something like, I don't know, 48 seconds. Does that sound about right, Jess? I know you're a swimmer here. Something like that. So that would be anaerobic glycolysis. What about this one? Now, Alice has got depends. A lot of people have gone straight to aerobic. It depends on the distance. Yeah, nice. So we're really thinking here. I can tell you that this is a 2-kilometer row and it takes them, let's say, between 6 and 7 minutes. And now we've got enough information where we can say it's the aerobic system. I noticed someone say aerobic glycolysis. Claire, that's you. There was other people that said aerobic glycolysis. Can we be very careful with that? You're correct, but that's too much information. It's enough. VCAA just want to see you say aerobic system. They won't always penalise you for giving too much information, but there have been times where giving too much information has made the response wrong. Aerobic system.
And in this particular one, Paul, if it's asking you for the question, I think it's been 2 occasions on the last 3 years, which energy system, and it's an identify or state is the command word. So you're just writing energy system. It's the aerobic energy system. And if you were to write aerobic glycolysis energy system, you wouldn't get the marks.
Okay. So don't give that extra information. Aerobic energy system, please. Well, are you up to putting this poll up? Thank you. You're a good man. Thank you. Okay, I didn't realise this would be so well answered, to be honest with you.
Hey, mate, as they do this, I'm going to just put an answer. I'm going to copy and paste an answer from the chat. It's from an anonymous attendee. But, gee, in terms of examiners, and got to remember that all 3 of us will mark your exams at the end of the year. And we do our best to make sure that we get everything absolutely right. But if you guys do a really good answer, like the one that I'm putting in, just made it so easy for me. In terms of like even just the structure, like there's 4 clear points, really simple. We've gone for the really good PE language in terms of rate and yield. I just reckon that's a winner.
Well done to that person. Come forward and make yourself known. It would be awesome to give you that feedback personally. Okay, so most people here have gone with D. And I can understand that the only other one really that you might go with is A. The correct answer is D. Think about it in terms of it's an aerobic event because it's going for 6 to 7 minutes. So by far the greatest amount of ATP is going to come from that aerobic energy system. All right, we need to move on. What's this one? Hopefully you know that these are the greatest aerobic athletes in the world. Well, one of the greatest aerobic athletes in the world. They continually blow up those VO2 max testing machines. So these are aerobic. Now, all the events that we've seen so far are continuous events. That is, they got to start and the athlete doesn't stop or get a chance to rest until the end of the event. But you and I both know that there are sports where that's not the case. We call these intermittent sports. All right. Yes, Brownie, intermittent sports. And in intermittent sports, it's not as clear cut as to what the greatest contributor is. And in fact, the greatest contributor is going to change depending on what the athlete is actually doing. So Ash Barty here in a 5-hour tennis match, the greatest contributor, because of the huge duration of the match, is going to be the aerobic system, no doubt. But if she's hitting a very powerful forehand, as she is in this picture, what's going to be the greatest contributor? Right. It's going to be the ATP-PC system. But if that forehand is happening at the end of a extended rally where she's had to hit 20 forehands in a row, what's going to be the greatest contributor? All right, possibly it's going to be the anaerobic glycolysis system. So intermittent sports are slightly different to continuous sports in that continuous sports, if they go for a certain length, then the aerobic system is going to become the greatest contributor and it's going to remain the greatest contributor. With intermittent sports, we have opportunities for rest, which means that we can replenish PC stores. We can utilize the ATP-PC system throughout the match. So we need to then formulate different types of interplay questions for intermittent sports, which is where we're going to now. Now, just before I get there, again, let me remind you, this is where we try and sell things, so I apologize. But if you're finding this beneficial and you think you could benefit from getting this slower on a weekly basis, please sign up for our Aiming for the Next Level tutorial series. It ran during term 1 and everyone found it very, very beneficial. We love doing it because we love talking about PE. The other thing I'd like to say is, if this information is resonating with you and you feel like you're benefiting from it, we also have notes that you can purchase on our website. Each of those notes compartmentalizes the course into topics, and at the end of those topics, there are multiple choice questions and VCAR style short answer questions. All right, so 2 things for you to think about. Energy system interplay. I've already said that all energy systems work all the time. That is, the energy systems do not work in isolation to produce ATP. They're always contributing throughout an event. But as you know, that at any given stage, one of those energy systems is the greatest contributor. So whenever you see energy system interplay in a question, I want you to straight away go to what we call a generic statement. It shows your understanding of interplay. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a mark for this statement, although often you do. But what it does do is it provides entry into an interplay response. It shows the assessor, you know what interplay is. That is, interplay is when all 3 energy systems contribute. And in this activity, whatever the activity is, it could be a game of soccer, it could be a 12-minute run, it could be a 100-meter sprint. All 3 energy systems will contribute during this event. Intensity and duration determines which one is the greatest contributor at any time. Here's our interplay graph. All right, so you'll see this graph from time to time. What it's telling me is at the beginning of exercise, we're going to utilize the ATP-PC system as the greatest contributor, either because you're exercising at a very high intensity or because you're in that period of oxygen deficit. But as the duration of the activity continues, the anaerobic glycolysis system will increase its contribution. And as the duration of the activity continues, the aerobic system will increase its contribution. So I'm going to give you a formulaic approach to answering interplay questions. Now it's formulaic, and VCAA don't like the formulaic approach. But my contention is that when we're first starting out, it's handy to have something to rely on. It's scaffolding for you. So here is how I ask my students to attack an interplay question. Just something that actually a student from last year made up. When we're doing an interplay question, I would like you to think of intensity, duration, rate, and yield. And we had a bit of a competition to see if someone could come up with an acronym for that last year. And a young lady came up with I definitely rate you, which I quite liked. I definitely rate you reminds me that when I'm talking about each of the energy systems, I need to remember intensity, duration, rate, and yield. And I need to try and work that into my response Let's see how I go here. So interplay questions are often 6 marks. Over the last few years, they've been 8 marks because they've included fatigue and recovery. Sometimes they're 5. They're not always neat at 6, but they're certainly high mark answers. Right? These are higher order questions. Start with a generic statement. Then go to the overall greatest contributor in the event. So if it was a 12-minute run, I would say that the overall greatest contributor is the aerobic system. Why? Because of the duration of the event and the low intensity of the 12-minute run. Sorry, I should say the test, not the event. If it was a game of football, football goes for 120 minutes. So I'd say due to the duration being 120 minutes, the greatest contributor is going to be the aerobic system. I would need to find somewhere in the prompt, in the question, where the ATP-CP system is the greatest contributor. And I need to justify that using intensity, duration, and tell the reader about the rate and yield of the ATP-CP system. So usually in the question, there's a prompt about where these systems might be used. We need to find where the anaerobic glycolysis system is the greatest contributor, utilizing intensity, duration, and stating the rate and yield of the energy system. And then I need to find where the aerobic system is used throughout. Again, using intensity, duration to justify it, and stating the rate and yield of that energy system. Now, in intermittent sports, often the aerobic system's main role is rest. And so during that rest time where the aerobic system is the greatest contributor, we're going to be removing hydrogen ions and replenishing PC stores so that we can utilize our anaerobic systems when the ball comes back to us. The final mark in a 6-mark answer is going to come from you using the stimulus material. That is, you need to be using the information in the prompt and using it often. All right. We won't have enough time for you to do this question. So I'm going to run through the continuous response, the continuous interplay response. So as part of this course, I got my kids, and Willie got his kids also, to run a 400-meter sprint, a 12-minute run, and we played a game of tennis. And we took heart rates. And there's the heart rate of the 12-minute run in the red line for this particular person. The speed is up here. You can see that this person, from the moment they started the 12-minute run to the moment they finished the 12-minute run, their speed was pretty constant. If anything, it went up slightly at the end, which is not unusual because usually the teacher yells out, right, you've got a minute to go, and everyone runs just that little bit faster to see if they can get a greater distance. So that's the speed, remain relatively constant. But look at the heart rate. Started down here at rest, or as close to rest as possible because we probably did a warm-up. It took time for the heart rate to respond to the activity. But eventually we got this nice plateau here where this person was in steady state. And then at the end, it slightly went up, not by much. And then once the 12-minute run finished, down it came. So you have to write an interplay response for the 12-minute run. Using the data from the graph. Okay, so I have to use heart rate data as well. Explain energy system interplay during the 12-minute run. Now, guys, I don't know whether you are caught up and whether I should go and do this. No, so I'm going to do this and then I'll let loose with an intermittent one, okay? Now, the chances of you giving feedback to everyone are going to be very, very small, but I still would like them to do an intermittent. Okay, so let's go through this continuous one. We're going to start with our generic statement. Remember that when we do this, I definitely rate you. I want you to be trying to use intensity and duration to justify the energy systems and trying to sneak in there some rate and yield information about each energy system. So here's my response. It includes everything, so I apologize. It probably will be longer than your one. There's my generic statement. All 3 energy systems work together. Intensity and duration determines which one's the greatest at any time. Now, I might get a mark for that, I might not. Overall greatest contributor. So due to the 12-minute duration, the aerobic system is going to be the overall greatest contributor to ATP production. Now I need to go looking for where the ATP-PC system is the greatest contributor, anaerobic glycolysis, and the aerobic system. So at the beginning of the run, whilst the person is in O2 deficit, the ATP-PC system would be the greatest contributor. It has a fast rate and a very low yield. Please note, I haven't spoken about 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 12 seconds. I've not used a time in there. And the reason is that this person in the 12-minute run didn't sprint at the start. So their PC stores would go far beyond 10 seconds. It's only during maximal intensity that we run out at around about that 10-second mark. So I don't want you to talk about timings here. It's individual. We don't know the person and how much PC they've got stored. But we do know that because they're in oxygen deficit at the beginning of the event, and we know that because look at the heart rate data, they're in oxygen deficit here. That is, oxygen supply is not meeting demand. And in that circumstance, we must be relying on the anaerobic systems to provide ATP. But as we get further into oxygen deficit, our PC stores, or at least our ATP-PC system, is going to be decreasing its contribution, probably because PC stores are depleting. And as that happens, our anaerobic glycolysis system becomes the greatest contributor, whilst we're still in oxygen deficit. It has a fast rate and a low yield. But eventually, sufficient oxygen reaches the muscles and the aerobic system becomes the greatest contributor. This system, this is because of the low intensity and long duration of the test. Now, I've still not spoken about a time. I don't know what time it is, although I could go back to the graph and I could probably earmark it at around about the 2 to 3 minute mark. So once O2 supply meets O2 demand, a steady state is reached, and I've put in some data here because the question says using data. This system remains the most relied on energy system until the end of the 12-minute run and produces ATP at a slow rate, but a very high yield. So see, I'm getting the I definitely rate you stuff in: intensity, duration, rate, and yield. Now, that athlete did go a little bit faster at the end of the event. That's quite normal in a 12 minutes run. What you need to know is that any increase in intensity, because the teacher calls out, we've got 1 minute to go, or maybe there's a hill in a 12-minute run, not a test, but just a jog. As intensity increases, we are going to get increased anaerobic glycolysis contributions. But if you learn nothing except this from tonight, it will be well worth it. The aerobic system remains the greatest contributor, because in a continuous event, once the aerobic system assumes or becomes the greatest contributor, it will remain the greatest contributor. And any increasing intensity is because of an increased contribution from the anaerobic glycolysis system. But the anaerobic glycolysis system will not become the greatest contributor. All right, your turn, folks. And this will bring us home. We have a volleyball game. I'm going to give you an opportunity to read this now. Okay, so I would go through this and start picking information out. So if I'm doing this in an exam situation, I am annotating this question big time. What's the first piece of information that you see there that's going to be of interest to you? Yeah, Gemma's got it straight away. Duration. Yeah, well done, Jess. Well done, Brownie. Absolutely. Well, that's what I went to. All right, so I've got 30 and 60 minutes, and straight away, I'm thinking that the overall greatest contributor in this volleyball match is aerobic. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Well done. Okay, so next, I'm going to go to this information here. High intensity, short duration movements such as serving, passing, setting, and spiking. And straight away, I'm looking at periods in this match where the ATP CP system is the greatest contributor. Nice. What's the next piece of information that's interesting for us, guys? Silence is deafening. Bridie, Harry, nice. I've got rest periods. That's where I'm going, because this is recovery time. So we've got some very high intensity skills fueled by the ATP CP system, followed by rest periods. And this is where I need to put in that, you know what, PC can be replenished during this period. All right. What we don't have is any information on the anaerobic glycolysis system. But here's a tip for young players. We need to give the assessor a time in a volleyball match where it may be the greatest contributor. It's okay to say that in this period, it doesn't look like anaerobic glycolysis system is the greatest contributor. However, then tell the assessor the anaerobic glycolysis system may be the greatest contributor in this circumstance. Okay, so I am going to shut up and I'm going to give you 6 minutes. Okay, 6 minutes. This is a 6-mark question. Now, that's probably not realistic. You're probably going to take 7 or 8 minutes at this stage of the year to get this question. All right, Dave, perfect answer. Extended rally is going to be a pretty great example of where the anaerobic glycolysis system is the greatest contributor. All right, so I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to give you an opportunity to get an answer in so that we can provide at least some feedback to you. All right, give it your best shot. I may pull up short, but what I am going to do before you do go, I'm going to give you guys some homework with a promise that anyone who does the homework, Wooly and I will give you feedback via our video or via a video on your answer. Okay, so do your best to craft this. I know that we're late in the night and this is possibly the last thing you want to do is engage your brain, but this is where you're going to get the most benefit is the practice, and then I'll give you your homework and you can take off. All right, go for your lives, guys. And Mon just said, Monique just said that she would like to go through the answer to this. So it'll be well worth your while hanging on for this one.
Good job, Stocky. Sorry, I know they probably want silence. Have you explained Stockdale's law? Yeah.
Yeah, I did go through it, but I didn't call it Stockdale's law, mate, in case there's going to be someone one day come at me with copyright.
Yeah, okay, that's good because it does make you sound like a bit of a tool too. So that's a good thing. But remember, it's really important because it's coming through on the chat. That rule is for continuous sports, okay, which means a sport where the start of, and it's usually a race, to the end of the race, there is no break. This sport
Not relevant.
Irrelevant law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, mate. That's important. We got any in yet? Yeah, we have, haven't we? Okay. No, not many. I'm going to give 30 more seconds and then hand over to you, Mon, if that's okay.
Great, thank you.
Stockers, I'll start having a crack going through these, mate. But everyone, if you want to just copy and paste your answer, just in case I don't get to it, and then you can shoot it to us on email and we'll get to you at some point, we promise.
Mm-hmm. That's a great idea, mate, and that can go with the homework. So, all right, Mon, if you'd like to, you tell me how you'd like me to proceed. I've obviously got the answers ready to go.
Go back to that one for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the first one? The other one, go back. Yeah, perfect. Just stay on that one for a sec. All right, so firstly, I'd just like to reiterate a few things that Paul mentioned that I think are really key points. Like Paul spoke about the generic sentence that starts off, and he's spot on in saying that you don't need to necessarily write that sentence to get full marks, but it is such a great way to start. It gives you a little bit of confidence. You've written something down, you've settled into the question. So I always encourage my students to write that generic sentence down as well. You've got something, you've started, you've entered, and then you can continue on from there. The other point that I think was really key was about trying to avoid those timeframes. So for middle or lower level students, when we read energy system interplay, it might read ATP, CP 0 to 10, anaerobic glycolysis 10 to 60, and they really lean on those timeframes. Don't write it as a time frame, write it as a narrative, a story of what's actually going on when you're exploring that particular activity. This recipe is fantastic. Everyone loves a recipe when they're writing energy systems interplay. And as you practice, you'll get better and incorporating little bits and pieces of information, of making it more concise. The answers that are coming in the questions are really great. You've really ticked off on those particular points. A couple of people were asking about for 6 marks, what do I need to get for that 6 mark? And quite often for a 6 marker or above, it's marked what's called holistically. So that end mark is for flow, for being concise, for not including superfluous information that perhaps is incorrect. And you'll develop that as you practice the energy system interplay questions. So the way Paul's written this answer is ticking off on those key points. Do you want to jump over to the answer now? So we started off with that generic sentence, gives a little bit of confidence, and then gone on to identify the energy system that contributes the most. Paul's used the term most relied on overall, steering away from that word dominant or predominant. It's a really nice way to say that. Note as well that the data has been included, so pulling down from the stimulus of the question and saying that the 30 to 60 minutes is your justification as to why the aerobic system will be relied on overall. Then we start talking about the different energy systems, again, bringing down information from that stimulus. And that's really important to get those top marks. Students at the very top will draw on information from the stimulus of the question. And I always like to say as well, try and include a fun fact. And here Paul's underlined the fun facts there. But if you can put a fun fact in, that serves really well to justify your inclusion of the energy system. So Paul's written here these key terms. We've got maximum intensity explosive, and then he's brought in some stimulus from the question, linked it with the correct energy system, and used those key terms like fast rate and low yield as the justification of why that system is going to be the greatest contributor for those particular efforts. And there's so many different ways you can write that sentence. You could say something like, the ATP-CP system, which provides energy at the fastest rate, will contribute the most for maximum intensity explosive activities such as blocking. So you can flip it around a bit and have a bit of a play around as you write these out to see what you feel comfortable with. But importantly, we've got in the energy system, our fun facts, and we've linked it to the stimulus of the question. Then we've spoken about, and this goes to that narrative, is that you've done a maximal activity and then you've got rest. And during that rest, energy demand is quite low. So the aerobic system is going to be able to provide the most amount of energy. And here, Paul said the slower aerobic system. So we've got that little fun fact in there, and also mentioning, and this is a really important point for intermittent sport, that stop-start, that not only does the aerobic system provide the most amount of energy to restore ATP or resynthesize ATP, it's restoring CP during that time, which allows for the CP to be the major contributor for explosive efforts that are following that period of rest. Then when we're talking about the anaerobic glycolysis system, wanting to use terms like repeated efforts, or as was mentioned in chat about the extended rally. So those kind of ideas where it's still very high on maximal intensity activity, but the rest hasn't occurred or there's been insufficient rest to restore CP here. Again, coming in with our fun fact about fast rate, but slightly higher yield. So you can see how much information Paul's jam-packed into these answers. He's linked it really well in terms of rest or blocking or spiking to the stimulus of the question for that last particular point there. So this is a really nice setup and a really nice recipe for an intermittent sport. And it's up to you to have lots of practice with these different types and find what settles well for you. Trying to tick off that, have I got the stimulus? Have I referenced the stimulus? Yes, absolutely. Have I mentioned a fun fact? Yes, I have. Have I mentioned the energy systems? So the data in the question, I'll just talk to that there. We've got the 30 to 60 minutes is some information that's used. We can call that data, or we can call that information from the stimulus. And we've got serving, passing, setting, and spiking, all of those words and blocking that are being used in this response here.
Yep. And that's just a cut and paste from the stimulus. And the other thing I'd point out, folks, is that in my formula, I had written down ATP-PC system, anaerobic glycolysis system, aerobic system, but note in this stimulus, it talks about the ATP-CP system and then goes to rest. That's aerobic. So I've actually followed the prompt or the stimulus in the order, and I would suggest that you do the same. It doesn't always have to be in that order. Be guided by the stimulus. Okay, so there's no way that Woolie's going to get to all of these. So hopefully you have copied and pasted, and you will email them into us. I did say that there would be a little bit of homework. Oh, just before we do take off, 3% gets 6 for that, guys, in 2014. So my point being that interplay is very poorly done statewide. And so if you want to differentiate yourself from the pack, this is where you're going to do it. And the only way to do it is, as Monique said, practice, practice and practice. You can go to any VCAR exam, you go back as far as you want, there'll be an interplay question in it. Practice it and send it to your teacher, send it to your friends, send it to us. We're happy to look at it and get feedback. All right, but these are our differentiating questions. Now, this is last year's, and I wanted to offer that if you do last year's exam question, then we'll mark it. All you need to do is send it via email. It might take us a couple of days to get back, but I promise if you email your response in, we will get back and provide you with that feedback. So take a screenshot or go to the VCAR website if you haven't already. It's well worth going to. Find that question, type it out, and send it in. As I say, you don't have to go back too far. In every year, there are these interplay questions. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you for hanging on. The vast majority of you have hung on. I do hope that that has been of benefit. I want to thank Monique in particular as a special guest tonight for joining us. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that everyone listening here tonight has learned a lot, Monique. So thank you. I know you're busy, you've got a family, and yet you still find time to join us and help out the PE students in the state. So cheers.
For energy systems, Paul.
Yeah, I know you love it. And you'll find that we love this. So please contact us. We're happy to give you feedback. Mike, thank you for slaving away in the background whilst I've had the fun part of presenting. For the rest of you out there who are still here, Wooly and I, in the very least, and possibly Monique, are happy to hang around. And if you've got questions that you would like to ask us, we're happy to try and answer them for as long as you are. All right. If for those that need to go, it's late. I've been Paul Stockdale. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks heaps, guys.
See you later.
We got heaps of videos on this too, guys, on YouTube and Instagram, Facebook. So have a crack at them if you like. Do you want to stop the recording, Stocky?
Shall do.
Well done, mate. Good job.
Thank you.